just tell you. Are you ready? Shall we start? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hello. Hello. Thank you, Michelle. Warm welcome, everyone, to our talk today, Realising the Double Dividend, Gender and Climate Change. My name's Sally Henderson. I'm the Head of Programs at ActionAid Australia. First, I'll do the acknowledgement. We acknowledge we're on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people with deep cultural, spiritual and historical connections to this place on which we're meeting. And we acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So we have two panelists and hopefully we will have a third online, but we're not quite sure. She's actually negotiating at COP28 in Dubai. So we're not quite sure if she's going to get online. She will be online. Excellent. First of all, I'll introduce you to Joyce Daz, Dr. Joyce Daz. She's the Executive Director and co-founder of Go Equal Gender Equity Consulting. Joyce has a PhD in Gender Studies from ANU and has many years of experience in advising and training in gender. She's the principal author of the paper we present today. The next two panelists are from ActionAid. And just in case, ActionAid is a global federation working in at least 45 countries, implementing a human rights-based approach. We prioritise women's rights, and we have a large focus on climate change, hence the talk that we have. We will also have, hopefully, Ms. Flora Vano. As I said, she's currently at COP28 in Dubai, so it's very early in the morning there. She's strongly engaging and influencing for climate justice for women in Vanuatu. Flora is the country manager of ActionAid Vanuatu. She plays a critical role in empowering near Vanuatu women to lead, organise and strategise through Women Who Talk Together. And she will explain what that forum is. She's also among the founders of Women Weta Weta, a women-led multi-hazard early warning system, an excellent example of localisation. She was also a finalist in the 2022 Disaster Risk Reduction Rising Star Award. So she's a rising star. And lastly, we have Ms. Michelle Higelin, but not leastly, the Executive Director of ActionAid and co-chair of the Australian Civil Society Coalition on Women, Peace and Security. So Michelle has been working to advance gender equality in Australia and internationally for close to 3 decades. And she served on several global advisory bodies to the UN on multiple topics, including on peace building and food security. So we have a wonderful panel today with decades experience in and passion for gender equality and feminism, and also how that intersects with climate change. The way the session will work is I will start with a small introduction on what gender blindness might look like if you don't address it under climate change. Then Joyce will make a presentation, Flora will make a presentation, we'll have a small film, and then Michelle will have the final presentation. Then we'll have a Q&A, and I'll be asking some initial questions, and then we'll throw it to the floor. So my introduction. Women, including in Vanuatu, were and are and ever will be the critical first responders to ever increasing and intensifying climate-related crises in their communities. Cyclones, floods, droughts, rising sea levels, acidification. And we note that Vanuatu was hit by twin cyclones in March last year, Kevin and Judy, and unseasonably early tropical cyclone Lala. So there is definitely a climate change effect. However, these women are burdened by gendered and inequitable systems, policies and practices are discriminatory. And if you continue to be gender blind when it comes to climate change, then women will continue to be less economically resilient. Their gender-specific knowledge of natural resources and how climate change is manifesting in their communities will be ignored. their efforts and labour is not valued. They won't have access to productive infrastructure or services they need to adapt, and violence against them will increase from an already bad base. They will also not be equipped with new knowledge. For example, climate scenarios. Where do they put their fields? Where do they build their houses? And this was more or less the situation before ActionAid started working in Vanuatu after TCPAM. However, this situation can be changed, as our panelists will tell you, leading to the realization of the double dividend of gender equality and climate justice. So firstly, I'll hand to Joyce, who recently tested and verified a gender-responsive climate change approach or framework, which was established by Monash University, Maria Tanyag and Jackie True, and also ActionAid, based on research with our offices in Vanuatu, Cambodia, and Kenya. Over to you, Joyce. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, for this wonderful introduction. And I just been in a panel before lunch, and the presenter was actually speaking without any notes, without even looking at the slides. She just memorized the whole presentation, and now I'm feeling very intimidated because I have a script to read. So please bear with me. Hello, everyone. In today's presentation, as Sally just mentioned, I will introduce an ActionAid's framework that addresses the marginalization of women's knowledge and leadership in policy and decision-making that inhibit gender-responsive solutions to climate change. The framework is known as the Gender-Responsive Alternative to Climate Change, or GRAC framework, as you can see. So what we have done is that we attempted to see the GRAC framework in action at the local level through a capable project, a capacity building project, basically, of ActionAid. So we analyzed the capable project through the lens of the GRAC framework. So today we will be sharing some of the findings of that work. Next slide, please. Oh no, the previous one, sorry. Thanks. So before going into analyzing the capable project, let me just unpack the gender responsive alternatives to climate change, or the GRAC framework. So the GRAC framework was developed, as Sally said, based on a research done by Monash and ActionAid that addresses the challenges and impacts of climate change on communities by building upon women's lived experiences. And today I'm going to talk about three components, or you can say findings, of GRAC framework. As you can see in the figure, there are three components, and I'm going to unpack those. Next slide, please. So the first finding or the component of GRAC framework is that GRAC framework acknowledges that women's localized and traditional knowledge of climate change has almost never been recognized as legitimate sources of knowledge, unlike scientific knowledge that often informs the climate change policies at the local, national, and global level. However, research has shown that due to their traditional gender roles as carers, reproducers, subsistence food producers, water and fuel collectors, and so on, women gain specialized knowledge on the environment that intrinsically connects crisis, climate disaster, conflict, food security. This type of knowledge can provide important insights into novel warning indicators and long-term adaptation plans at household and community levels. The GRAC framework argues that by increasing the mutual awareness of scientific and women's localized and traditional knowledge of climate change, the potential for alternative climate change responses can be significantly enhanced. Next slide, please. Now, the second component of the GRAC framework is women's participation in crisis response. It is widely recognized that women often serve as community workers voluntarily as an extension of their specific gender role as a caregiver. Women's community roles often put them in a forefront of post-disaster responses to communities and the related consequences of climate change. However, despite women's deep knowledge of community needs during and after disasters, their participation and leadership often are not recognized by governments and national and international aid organizations. GRAC framework recognizes that women as community leaders often face multiple barriers, such as, but not limited to, social and cultural norms, gendered division of labor, including unpaid labor, gender-based violence, and access to and control over resources that prevent women from engaging in community efforts. Once women overcome these barriers, according to the GRAC framework, their active participation and leadership in community work provide the foundation of sustainable alternatives to climate change. Next slide, please. The third component of the GRAC framework advocates for women's collective action that works as an enabling factor for integrated responses to interrelated crises at the community level. Although women lack a voice in the leadership in climate change, women's networks train women for their sustained participation and establish and recognize women's leadership pre, during, and post-crisis. Women's collective action through women's networks enables women as local decision makers and active participants in bridging the gaps in local and national level climate governance. Next slide, please. So that was the GRAC framework in a nutshell. And now let's look at the Capable project, which we have used as a case to look through the GRAC lens. The Capable project aimed to increase women's leadership capacity to participate in and connect with national and global agendas on climate change by enhancing the capacity of community women leaders and local practitioners in Cambodia and Vanuatu. The Capable project recognizes that the global agendas still remain siloed, which is more sector focused, and technocratic, that is inclusion of scientific knowledge only. By putting the GRAC framework into action, this project asked a broader policy question: how siloed and often technocratic global agendas be transformed into a more integrated and gender responsive solution to climate change and related crises. Drawing on ActionAid's extensive global experience in supporting women's empowerment and movement building, the project has enhanced capacity through a joint learning workshop and field visits on gender and climate change, engaging with relevant national actors and universities, establishing a bilateral women's community of practice for joint advocacy planning at regional platforms and ongoing leadership, and supporting women as local resources to transfer skills, localized scientific knowledge, and build evidence on the role of women as climate leaders. The project objective was to enhance women's leadership capacity to participate in and connect national and global agendas on climate change and related disasters. This Capable project engaged community women leaders who have already been participating in ActionAid's GRAC program. So in Vanuatu, GRAC has been working with Women Talk Together, WITT, a local women-led collective with over 4,000 members working to claim their rights and develop solutions addressing the gendered impact of climate change. Whereas in Cambodia, a women champions network across 3 provinces leads community awareness raising and collaboration with the government to expand women's leadership on climate change and DRR. Next slide, please. Oh, no. Yes, this is the one. So when we analyzed Capable Project through GRAC framework, we had 4 key findings. So the first one was, although evidence suggests that women's traditional knowledge has the potential to inform early warning systems and indicators, a lack of mutual awareness and recognition of different types of knowledge, and more specifically, scientific and women's localized knowledge to climate change, can be seen that often undermines the potential for alternative climate responses. In the joint learning workshop, the Capable Project, ActionAid Vanuatu demonstrated their multiple efforts to bridge this gap between scientific and women's localized knowledge of climate change and related crises. So I'll give you an example from this project. So Women Wetam Water, which is Witch Sunshine from Port Vila, Vanuatu. So Women Wetam Water is an early warning system that prepares and informs women and girls in WIT network about any potential tropical cyclone. Many women and girls with disability do not have a smartphone or similar technology, in the local community. However, within the network, they have been provided with a smartphone and were trained on how to use smartphones. This has enabled these women and girls to use technology, including taking photos. So now women and girls are capable of taking photos that help them to understand and communicate the early signs of disasters and the impact and challenge they face. Therefore, women and girls with disability now participating in collecting data in the DRR and climate change space. Through the Capable Project, community women and local staff connected with each other translated how global processes and policy impacted their work and how to inform these policies with their existing local and traditional knowledge. This bottom-up approach is critical, as we know that solutions to the climate crisis are context sensitive, and development and humanitarian systems need to become more responsive to this and take on a greater gender lens. Now, second finding, the Capable Project demonstrated that recognizing women's localized and traditional knowledge and bridging the gaps between different types of knowledge, and more specifically between scientific and women's localized knowledge, often leads to women's greater participation and leadership at community, national and international levels, and increasing impactful collective actions. So another example from Vanuatu, WIT, Tana. So the women-led community-based protection, which is ActionAid's default strategy for humanitarian programming that builds on local women's strengths, knowledge, and experience. So WLCBP, which is this framework that I'm talking about, approach emphasizes the essential roles of women leaders in emergencies in identifying their protection needs and solutions to these challenges, and in creating community-based support structures that can better protect women's rights and in times of crisis. Now, what Tana in Vanuatu it is a disaster-prone area that often faces volcanic ash falls during along with other disasters. So the WIT Tana has been successfully implementing the women-led community-based protection framework, as I said, which is the ActionAid's default strategy for humanitarian programming approach, by contextualizing the WLCBP manual and toolkit. So through interpreting this approach and the manual and toolkit to reflect the local context, the WIT Tana has made this approach more relevant, easily understandable, and accessible for women at the local level in Vanuatu. We also found that women's capacity building to remove the barriers to their participation leads to sustainable development. The GRAC framework has recognized that once the barriers women face, including gender division of labor, social norms, and gender-based violence that hinder women's active participation and leadership in climate change and DRR are removed, women's community work impacts beyond the realm of DRR and often contributes to broader sustainable development. In the joint learning workshop, ActionAid Cambodia reported evidence of the same and showed that women's capacity building to remove the barriers to their meaningful participation is crucial to achieving sustainable outcomes. And finally, we found that women's collective action and leadership enable women's networks from local to global levels to have flexible, joined-up responses to interrelated crises. Although society still functions largely by unequal gender norms and gender division of labor that put women at periphery of power dynamics, women's network, local, national, and international, have worked as training grounds for women active and sustained participation and recognized women's capability and authority before, during, and after crisis. So with that note, I will end my presentation, and the other panelists will carry on the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joyce. Sorry, we've been frantically trying to get Flora online, but we've succeeded in getting her online. So now I'm going to hand to Flora. So she's at COP in Dubai, so it's early in the morning. So we really appreciate her being on. And she'll describe the work she's been doing in Vanuatu to empower women towards climate change adaptation and justice, and how that relates to the framework. Over to Flora.
Let me start again and reintroduce myself. My name is Flora Vano, and I'm so happy to be here. It's very early in the morning, but I'm sure my colleagues have got me in time. AAV have started in Vanuatu following Cyclone Pam to support New Vanuatu women's leadership in responding to climate change and disasters. Today, we have a network of over 9,000 women across 5 islands in 4 provinces, and this includes 740 women with disability who are part of our Woman Talk Together Sunshine chapter. Our work supports women to adapt to climate change, prepare for disasters, and to respond when a crisis strikes. Through our economics hub, we are supporting women to build resilience to disasters and also rebuild back their life and recovery. Slide number 1, please. Slide number 1 is with analyzing impact of climate change in country. For us, the first step to support women's leadership on climate change has been to support women to examine the impact of climate change on their daily lives and their communities. We support women to learn about the climate science and to reflect on how it impacts their lives. Women use this analysis to identify the protection threats they face in times of crisis, the existing capacity they have to respond, and their own priorities for responding to climate change in the community. So from this photo here, you could see one of our wheat mobilizer with the impacts on climate change in their communities. They are saying in their own words how it is affecting them daily. So they have seen that the seas have come more in. So that sea level rise, they have seen that most of their land from where they have planted their mangroves, some of them has been gone out already. So that's the coastal erosion. So they have bring that in their own languages. And so we can actually have the climate change languages to put against it. We do not have a word in our own native languages that can explain directly the true meaning of climate change. For us to explain that meaning, we need to have it in a phrase or in a storytelling for the women to understand. We do not just have two words to exchange climate change on. So you could see from what our community mobilizer has been holding is a list of what they were seeing that they can explain in terms of climate change. Their root crops have become much more smaller. The rain have become much more heavier. And then our traditional leaf that we used to do, we call our traditional food lap. So you dig up the earth, and then you put stones, and then you cover your food, you put it under, then you get soil and you cover on top. That type of leaf is also, we are losing them now. And we don't know why is it that it's going extinct. It's just drying up, and no one can tell what causes it. So that became not many, as we can see in our gardens. It's giving the community and the women that these things are not normal, because we used to have plentiful of those leaves. Now we have less. And the rainfall, smaller shower one, when they put out on the radio, it said showers, but for them it become more heavier. And that's mean flash flooding will happen. And their from the riverbanks, they have garden that they have. There's a food that we planted near the river called water taro. And this is always swept when there's heavy flooding and flash flooding when there's rain. And rain showers now turn to 2 to 3 days. It doesn't only stays in 1 hour, 2 hours, but that's how long we have seen those changes. And they're putting it on paper, so it reflects what they were thinking and how we can capture when we are asking what are the impacts on climate change in their communities. Thank you. Next slide. With members sharing their knowledge about climate change. Vanuatu women have thousands of years of knowledge about how we have looked after our farms and land during weather events. And this knowledge has been passed along from generations to generations. We have been supporting women to share their traditional and indigenous knowledge and to use this alongside the climate science to prepare. So from this one here, when we talk about traditional knowledge to capture, we are looking on how women have been reading science, what nature have told us about what disasters that will come, what will happen the next day, the next week, or the next month. In this photo that was taken, you could see that they put cyclones. So when there's cyclones, each community have a way of how they know when there's a cyclone. You could tell from the fruits, plenty fruit. If the mango have bundles in almost every branches, and the bananas are just every bananas you passed, every 5 you will have 3 that will have big bunch of bananas. That is telling you that you will need to get ready. In the coming months, or this year alone, we will have cyclones like a problem. We will have 2 or 3 cyclones coming, because all of the fruits are much more, they are all, we will need to harvest all. They are all blooming, they are all ready. Nuts will be hanging, coconuts are plentiful, papaya, it just comes out. And we will have to get all this food, and we will have to preserve, because we know that in the coming months, this year alone, we will be struck with not a small cyclone, but a very, very severe one. It also speaks if the water will be much more rougher if the storm comes from the sea. You would see the turtles will lay their eggs not near the coastal area, but inland. They will go right inside, past the normal place they're laying their eggs, all the way up a little bit into the bushes. And that shows that the seawater level rise or the storm, the water will come until it will nearly reach them. The nature talks, the animals talks, the reptiles tell us everything. So some of the signs that we know that, okay, if there's a storm, the water from the seawater will move right up there, which means whatever we are planting here, we have to preserve. We have to make sure that our bandanas, because we have bandanas near the coastal area, the women will have to now prepare bandanas, because bandanas is used to weave mats. We know every time our houses have blown out, the roof goes out, everything in our houses entirely got wet. But mat is one thing we use as mattress. We put mat and then we sleep. So those mat is made out of bandanas. Bandanas grows along the coastal area. So when the turtles are telling us about their eggs being laid past the bandanas, we knew that the bandanas would be the first one to be destroyed. So we have to prepare bandanas. Bandanas, when we get those leaves, we created mats, hats, fan, we sell, and that is our economic, that is our livelihood. It actually brings us money. And those are the signs that we were getting to make sure we prepare for our livelihood as well. We can also look at it if we wanted to have a special dish, lobster, for example. Lobster is very expensive in the market, but women also trade lobster to get money. For them to do that, there are ways in each villages we're looking on making sure that they can harvest more of that. The next slide, unpacking food donation for wheat mallow in response to the twin cyclone. Our role in CRAC also is supporting women's leadership in emergency, which is an important part of our work. And we have found that when women lead and have access to resources to respond to the needs of community, they support a more inclusive response. Through the WIT network, women have mapped who is the most vulnerable in the community and their needs. And when they have access to resource to respond, they are able to ensure those most needs are met, to access food and dignity kits. So from this photo we have here, we have 3 gardens when we look at food security. So one garden is for home, for you to consume. Another garden is for you to sell at the market, and that's for your livelihood. And then the third garden is for disaster preparedness. It's for response and all that. And if the chief wants anything to do in the village, you touch that garden so you can help and assist. So it became your disaster garden. Women in Talk Together in Malo have responded to Vanuatu, to Port Vila, with 17 tons of food from the disaster garden. And that is a related response due to the work that we did in 2020. 2020, the women in down south went up to north to help them when they were damaged by Tropical Cyclone Harold. And so when the twin cyclone hit us this year in 2023, the women sort of mobilized and then just come back, and they said, we wanted to come and help our sisters down the south because they have helped us in 2020. They have come and helped us back on our feet. And this is how we talk about the localization of women leadership. Ensuring access to support services in times of crisis. CRAC highlights the importance of tackling harmful social norms, and for Vanuatu women, one of the most harmful norms is the increase in violence women face in times of crisis. This is often because of the lack of food during a crisis. We are working to address this through a woman-led community-based protection approach. That includes circulating information about support services during times of crisis, so women know where to get help. We support women through WIT, Women in Talk Together network, to identify their threats to their protection and identify and define their priorities for responding. This is supporting local women to drive their own protection agenda and also challenge the harmful norms that were in the community. So this protection card that we have seen here, it helps for them to call their toll-free numbers, and women usually they have it kept. Sometimes they put it in their pressed back here, or they tie it up on their island dresses and they can walk with it. And it became, we found out that some of the men are not happy when we use the word gender in the community with the women, or even when we are talking publicly. So the climate change platform is one of the platform where we can address gender-based violence, and the protection card, it is made in a way that we put all the other services that where if a man see it, if a husband saw this, they will be like, oh, that's really good. Our wife actually got us a protection card that we can call the police, we can call the ambulance, we can call the doctor in the hospital, we can call the weather. But right at the bottom of those, there is the referral pathway for women, the crisis center. It is embedded in that, but I wasn't talking about a crisis center for women, safe spaces. I only talk about the services that everybody else can access.
Thank you, Flora. That's fantastic to.
Sorry, Sally, Flora can't hear you.
Oh.
So Flora, thank you very much and stay online, because I think we have some questions for you a little bit later, but thank you.
Apologies for that. Now we'll show a short film which was made from women in Kenya, Cambodia and Vanuatu when they were visiting the UNICR conference in 2019 around disaster risk reduction.
Cyclones, droughts, floodings, disasters. It's the climate we are living in. Women are participating now at decision-making levels whereby they can decide on what to do when disasters hit the area. Cyclone Bam was a disaster that really affected the whole country of Vanuatu. The roofs were blown off. Our gardens were damaged. There was no food security. We have lost everything. Climate change has destroyed part of my life. Droughts hit the area. We lost our animals. So my father decided to marry me off. It destroyed my life because I never see my dreams.
ជាក់ស្ដែង3ឆ្នាំកន្លងមកនេះអំបិលធ្វើអត់បានព្រោះខែអំបិលត្រូវភ្លៀងធ្លាក់មកធ្វើឲ្យអំបិលផលិតអត់បានធ្វើឲ្យកាត់បន្ថយប្រាក់ចំណូលនៅក្នុងគ្រួសាររបស់ខ្ញុំ After cyclone, women in my community started to mobilize.
Women at my community organized themselves, and we told the Kenyan government the experiences that women has in the ground.
Before, women were not involved in decision-making. But as we come to know about CRAC project, this enables women to stand and to speak for themselves.
Về mà đa tí trong sân áo, nhưng miền là rắm thác nhưng sập bay rì rì. Về mà đa khơi miền là kia sầm nong, rung mòm cua. Hai nhưng ban cho ruộng về tất cả sạc con.
I was coming just thinking, I don't know what I will get from this conference. But when I came in here, I was amazed. More effort should be put onto these women, onto these groups to stand and talk in front of many people. It was really hard, but I'm so proud because I've already empowered other women. Make sure that we make this government accountable. Our voices is being heard at a global level.
Member states of the United Nations in New York will have the opportunity to hear what came out of this platform.
Nhưng ban vô chùm nét đăng pi sợi trai cropate đại ban mà cho ruộng về tất cả sạc con nâng cho ruộng chành để đôi chia chong krong bản đang sợi trai xã hạ cùng bà quạt giấy pi xã hạ cùng bà quạt đây pe men crom hoàn đại cát lang.
When I go back to Vanuatu, to my community, my hope for the future is to promote the women to be leaders in the country and in my community.
ActionAid has helped us build our networks. It has empowered me from where I was until where I am.
Hopefully that illustrated a little bit more our gender framework. Now I'm calling on Michelle, who's going to describe the enabling environment Australia could establish to realise the double dividend.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, well, and hopefully you can see when we talk about women's leadership, we're not just talking about at the community level, we're talking about every single level where decisions are made. And, you know, and I think one of the real values of giving space to women from communities on the front lines is that they make the urgency of the climate crisis real. And they bring perspectives that are often overlooked. This isn't theory. This is very much bringing their own experiences on the ground, which I think is critically important in a context where we know that gender equality is going backwards rapidly and that climate change is the major driver and intersecting crises. So we have this real urgency right at this moment, not just to hold on to gains in gender equality, but also to really curb the growing impacts of climate change on the ground. You know, the COP is taking place right now, and a huge thank you to Flora for joining us from Dubai. But, you know, it's become very clear that we will surpass 1.5 degrees. And that's the point where we know extreme flooding, disasters, wildfires will become commonplace. And a place like Vanuatu, you know, has seen that already this year. You know, two Category 4 destructive cyclones in the space of 48 hours. Also, you know, an out-of-season Category 4 cyclone, Lola, that just hit. Disaster after disaster, there's not even a moment to recover, and its impacts on women are quite profound. But also, I think within this picture, we know that there's hope. And the work that you heard about from Joyce and from Flora, we've just done, there's another piece of research that's under development, but this is finding that investments, particularly in women-led early warning, are effective, and they are leading to early protective actions with gender transformative impacts. And so the research that's just been done by UTS has found that the investment in women's leadership in responding to disasters and climate change has resulted in transformative impacts in women's roles in the household, in the community. It's also seeing increased economic resilience. Women are shifting government policy to be more inclusive. And we're also starting to see triggers for generational change among women as girls see their mothers taking on roles in the community, that they are having a greater outlook, a brighter outlook for their future. So I think that what we know, and this is why there is a real opportunity for Australia to be a champion, in driving gender transformative climate solutions. There's also an economic benefit. I don't fully understand that, but we hear that for every dollar that's invested in women-led early warning, that results in $4 of economic gain into the community, $4 of, gains that are being felt with a much broader impact. But once we have the research, we'll share that. But I think I wanted to start with, I guess, the status quo. This is what we have to address. The current reality is that global climate finance continues to be gender blind. I think Sally started with this about the impacts of gender blindness. Despite a lot of commitment to improve gender policies, processes, and analysis. And in fact, we've done quite a big look at all of the different climate financing mechanisms globally, and they've all made substantive improvements at that policy level. However, at the financing level, we're not seeing change. So the last data that we had that was accessible in 2019, 2020, only 2.9% of global climate-related development finance identified gender equality as a principal objective. And less than 1% of Australia's climate funding to the Pacific region identified gender equality as a principal objective. So, why does this matter? Why it matters is if we don't have complementary objectives running alongside that are actively targeting gender equality, we will continue to see climate change deepen gender inequalities. And that is the reality that we're seeing on the ground with increased violence, increased unpaid care work. So we see there's a real opportunity for us to strengthen this picture. But even I just also wanted to just touch on this slide as well that, we know that, and I think this is also really confirmed through the GRAC framework, that women's organisations are one of the most effective advocates for addressing the growing gendered impacts because they're on the ground. Gender equality is their main business. This is what they do every day. And they're working at tackling those harmful gender norms that Flora spoke to. But there are many barriers for women's organisations in accessing any of the available climate finance. Obviously, a difference between their objectives and those of donors. And this is particularly important where we see a very strong focus on climate infrastructure. But that's very much infrastructure defined by men. It's not infrastructure that's defined by what are women's needs in responding. Very restrictive funding cycles and a lack of dedicated, sustained core funding. And I think this is a particular thing. If you can't even afford the lights on or some of your basics, how can you actually also then have the space and time to be able to advocate and respond to the growing impacts? Clearly competition with larger organisations, better resourced civil society organisations. And I think this is something for all international NGOs to be thinking about. How do we not compete with local organisations on the ground that are best placed to respond? And also women's organisations have effectively been shut out of so many of these spaces. And I think that's why when you look at that, the effort to get women into different spaces is about opening those spaces, is about having that direct access to decision makers. And clearly this lack of funding for targeted gender responsive solutions. But there is an opportunity, and obviously we, herald a new international development policy, which is a chance to redress this and really look at how we can reap the double dividend and look at driving gender transformative climate solutions. These are two quotes out of Australia's new development policy. Our partners have been clear that they expect Australia to take ambitious action on climate change at home and abroad. It remains a foremost concern of our Indo-Pacific region and is the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security and well-being of Pacific peoples. And also recognition that placing gender equality at the centre of development creates opportunities for people to thrive, making our countries stronger, more secure and inclusive. And I think we're probably all aware of the commitment to, looking at how we mainstream both gender and climate across new investments. And I think that's a real opportunity to reap this double dividend. So I guess just in, wrapping up, I think we wanted to highlight that, for us to really reap this double dividend, we do need to see scaling up of targeted funding windows for gender transformative climate initiatives with specific funding that's accessible to women's rights organisations. So if we are to really tackle the harmful gender norms that continue to fuel climate change having a disproportionate impact on women, there needs to be funding to actually address those harmful norms and to support the organisations on the front line of that work. Ensuring the mainstreaming of gender and climate action across the AID program, that it's robust and effective. And I say this because, we've done a big sweep of a lot of the things that say they're addressing gender equality in the context of climate change. And they're not. They're just simply not. They're adding women. They're saying we're working with equal numbers of women and men, but that is not gender mainstreaming. And it is not tackling gender equality. It's simply including equal numbers of men and women without actually tackling some of the barriers that exist in terms of, women's leadership, women being excluded from leadership and decision-making, women having less access to resources than men, the norms that continue to keep women oppressed, like violence against women, and also the complete undervaluing, I think, that the GRAC framework highlights of women's knowledge, contributions that they bring to the table. And at the heart of, if we are to reap this double dividend, I think the most important thing is how do we foster women's leadership. And when I say women's leadership, I want to say diverse women's leadership. We're not talking about the leadership of women like the three of us down here. We're talking about the leadership of women like Flora in communities, women who are on the front lines of this crisis, women with disabilities, women from LGBTIQ communities, women living in poverty. And how do we foster that leadership and their participation in climate change decision-making at all levels? Starting with the community, but building up from there. So I think I will finish with that and just say, I think there's a real opportunity for us to drive things. And I think we do have to think about it in a context where there's growing demand. That demand will only increase. We are seeing a huge setback to women's rights driven by climate change. So unless we're tackling these two issues side by side, we'll continue to see the situation get worse. So thank you.
I was going to ask some questions, and I do have questions for the panel, but I'm aware that we've been talking at you for quite a while. So maybe we'll take some questions, maybe 3. And if you can say who you are and who directed to whom. Thank you.
Joe. That was great, thank you. It's really important work that you're doing. I just want to make a couple of points which take some of the significance of this work and bring it up to some of the moves that are happening globally. Just to note that there is something called the Gender and Environment Data Alliance that has been established as one of the collective commitments that has come out of the Generation Equality Forum process. And I mention it in this context because it's really trying to address some of the structural drivers of inadequate evidence of the impact of climate change on gender equality and on women's lives more broadly and on their knowledges. And it's trying to do something about that. It includes multilateral stakeholders and civil society and research organizations and others really playing very much at COP and trying to provide a structural framework around this so that research like this then comes in to be contributing and influencing the evidence base, because there is inadequate evidence, but there is evidence that's there in lived experience, and making that more widely available is really important. So if people haven't here connected to the work of the Gender and Environment Data Alliance, just to let you know that it is really trying to move some things along structurally. And the other thing is to come back to Michelle's point about the really foundational importance of investing in women's rights organizations. You would say that, wouldn't you? But I think it's really important in settings like this. The declaratory commitment to gender equality is so strong often, that we think that there's a lot of money going into it. 0.36% of official development assistance is currently going to women's rights organisations, and the amount annually going to women's rights organisations is broadly equivalent to the amount going to anti-rights organisations in just the US. So when we're thinking about pushback, we're thinking about evidence, we're thinking about who the actors are that are well placed to change. You know, we need to be really thinking very hard about what our policy players and our donors are doing to walk the talk on these things. There is evidence, there is acknowledgement, there is policy commitment. The resourcing is just so far behind what the urgencies of the problems require.
Well said, Joe, and couldn't agree more. And I mean, one other piece of evidence that I think I'll just also, just share with you. We also did this South Asia Women's Resilience Index, and it was called the Women's Resilience Index, not the Gender Index, because it found profoundly that there are significant issues that women face that impact their resilience to disaster. And it is such a complex picture. And that was building on data in 9 countries in South Asia. And at the crux of the issue is that while women continue to be shut out of decision-making on issues like climate change and disasters, the policies and plans will continue to sideline, marginalise, ignore their needs. And so they'll be trapped in this vicious cycle. But it also identified 4 areas for building resilience: social, economic, infrastructure, and institutional. And painted a really interesting picture that is actually a data-driven way of looking at the kind of interventions that can make a significant impact on building women's resilience in that context. And so, for example, you know, one of the things that really stood out, access to finance for women in Pakistan, for example, is one of the key things that can help build resilience, because when you look at the indicators, Pakistan is underperforming in the area of finance. So, I mean, so there is data out there, things that we can use to inform better programming and decision-making, and it is important that we look at it and we start to build more data about that, including what are effective interventions. And I think that's really been part of this investment in research around what is driving that gender transformative impact on the ground.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Paroma. I'm with Abd Associates, and in a past life, I used to work for ActionAid Bangladesh in the gender equality team. My question is to the panel. What has been the appetite in the donor level for feeding in all of these consultations that are happening, really great consultations and evidences that are coming up from the local level? What has the appetite been to listen and implement some of the actions that are coming out of it? And also, are there existing systems in place where these stories and lessons are seeping up to all echelons of decision makers? And it would be interesting for me to hear if there are.
It's an interesting question. I'm thinking, what is the appetite? I mean, we do see some governments making, very strong commitments around gender equality. Our government has some lovely words, but its targeted investment, and apologies if there's anyone from DFAT in the audience, but our targeted investment in gender transformative programming is we have a gender equality fund of 60 million. We have limited investment in targeted things, particularly when you look at the climate change portfolio. So, more needs to be done to translate words into actual resourcing and action. I mean, New Zealand's also, is one government it's made a financial commitment to look at gender and climate. It's not a huge commitment, it's a start. Obviously, Canada has the Equality Fund. It's really putting resources behind, the issues that matter. But we also see how fragile that is in a context of changing governments and changing priorities. And potentially, while we continue to have an aid program that's focused on our national interest, we're sort of missing the picture about what actually drives, eradicating poverty and ending, the injustice that's there. But yeah, is this getting up to upper echelons? I mean, maybe that's a good question for you, Flora, about, do you feel that there's a good, is there a gender discussion at COP about the impacts that climate change is having on women?
Thank you. Yes, there is. There is a lot of spaces where we've been asked to talk about the gender impacts on women. And it's driving side by side because there are loss and damage coming on one end, and then you've had.
There's a question.
Thank you. Love the presentations. Thanks a lot for educating us. There was the first presentation was talking about the scientific approach versus the women's approach. But a lot of the decision makers are going to be listening to the scientific approach. That's the reality. So how can we combine those two things better? Is it more women in science? Is it having women as science communicators that can bring in the two approaches, or how do you see the most effective way of bringing those two approaches together? Thanks. Sorry, Matt Spanning, Palladium.
No, I think the whole argument was that women's traditional knowledge, which is not seen as real form of knowledge in terms of when we compare with scientific knowledge. So more women coming to science, I don't think it will solve that issue. It will still remain because we are sort of not putting any value because of women's gender role, traditional gender role that women play in families and communities. They acquire a very specialized type of knowledge, which is from their experience, from their gender role, from their everyday lives. So often that knowledge is not reflected in the national and international policy space and how funding is sort of determined, how priorities are set. So this framework basically talks about bridging that gap between what we have seen as, as Michelle said, we often seen funding going for climate infrastructure as opposed to, so more and more donors and players are more interested about the hard knowledge of climate change. And what women gain through their life experience is more soft knowledge in terms of from their lived experience. So often that gap is not, there's still gap. And I think it goes back to what we call knowledge and what we not call knowledge, how the whole idea of knowledge is sort of kind of a colonial sort of construct. And this is where I think we need to break that sort of cycle of colonial sort of lens through what we define, what is knowledge basically, so going back to that question, I think that's what exactly this framework sort of addresses.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, this is where there's also an opportunity with the First Nations policy that the government's developing. If we're serious about doing this piece well, part of that means recognizing Indigenous knowledge. I mean, that's the knowledge that Flora talks about, the women having communities that have over generations. It is Indigenous knowledge. It is knowledge that comes from women through their gendered roles over centuries. But so if we are serious about it, I think that's one opportunity to really bridge that. And I mean, I think we know in our own country, there's so much to be learned from, First Nations people about how to look after the environment. But I just want to go back to Flora, because I know you're now back with us, and you were just talking about the loss and damage fund, and then you sort of cut out and froze. But I just wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to add or finish what you were saying about, I guess, the attention on gender at that international level.
Thank you. Sorry, I think something has come up with this internet system here. As I was saying, from the loss and damage fund that we have had from the first go of COP here, everybody is putting money in for that fund. The gender component for it also, we are looking on getting the text to be very simple and simplified. We are also demanding how is the access for women in the community to access those funds, because it will be going to a bank, and then that bank will be giving. So we don't know whether is it loan, because we don't want loans. So already the gender dynamics is playing around how the criteria is done already. So we are here telling them the realities of what it is like as a women living in crisis and climate change impacts in country, and what it is meant for us if the fund actually comes down, trickle down to us. What would it look like for us? How can we access? So this is exactly why the gender component is critical, because the women are the one who will rebuild back the home. The men, of course, they got muscles, but for a home to stay together, you need to have a woman who can cook, who can clean, who can care. And that if the whole intersectionality is being affected and impacted, they will have mental crisis, and therefore the whole healthy family we're looking towards, or building a resilient community, it won't happen. We need to include it in all discussion, and this is where we are seeing in all side event at COP, we are addressing gender inclusion, and not only women, but women and girls with disability also, getting their voices in there, not leaving anyone behind, make sure we are all included. Thank you.
Any other questions? There's one at the back there.
Thank you. I'm Telstar from Vanuatu with the Balance of Power program. I thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I know that women's leadership is a very sensitive issue in Vanuatu. In our 43 years of independence, only 7 women have managed to go into parliament. Currently, after 12 years, we've only had 1 MP now in a parliament of 52. It's a very patriarchal society, especially in one of the areas where ActionAid is working in with the WIT and on Tana Island. And it's wonderful to see that traditional knowledge on disaster risk management is being shared by such an impressive pool of women. Yet you have noted barriers. How do you tackle these barriers to gender equality, domestic violence, and actually for the men, allowing the women to lead? And how are these lessons being trickled back to the policymakers in country, such as the Department of Women's Affairs, as they can feed this into the national gender equality policy? Thank you.
Thank you for that. So ActionAid Vanuatu has an MOU with Department of Women's Affairs. The work that we do, it actually speaks to our national gender policy, all the 5 pillars we are implementing. In terms of political leadership, that is the only part that we haven't ventured into yet. We were having women leadership in humanitarian action because that saves life. We are having it on early warning, early action, because that can rebuild the community back. We don't need to wait for the government. So that critical component of what we have invested in for climate change is making sure that the women are able to address those issues. Noted that we have this patriarchy society, as you rightly said. In the community, most women are not seated in the council level where the chiefs are. Through this program, the chiefs are now allowing them to sit in. So now they can give their inputs into the decision-making. Decision-making was being left out, like you said, from the read through from the parliament. We don't have a voice there, only one. It still doesn't make a change, doesn't make anything. In the community level, we are from this route, we are from the bottom up. So when you look at framing women to be in this political arena, I think it needs to start setting the scene at the community level. How can they be respected by men? How can they be accepted by men? Those decision-making can only be seen for them to be more meaningful and participatory if the men accept them in their own community. And we have built that relationship over time. And now we have seen that women are called in to be sitting inside those immediate councils where the chiefs are. They might not be able to have the privilege to talk, but they were there as an observer first, and then later on they will be able to, raise hand and say their own opinion. We could see also from the provincial government, that women are called in to be part of the distribution, to be part of the data analysis, data collecting when times for crisis. There's a very good example, the twin cyclone that just come. For Tana example, Tafea province, we are seated there, and that is local women. Women in Totok together are seated inside the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. And for that, this is a breakthrough. That is a breakthrough for women at that level in communities to sit there, and they were also being consulted within the gender cluster. And they were giving, they were telling the government at that time that men-headed household, we need to also have the women-headed household in the data. We need to also include the disability-headed household in the data. We need to also include the child-headed household, because when both parents are out, the child are the one in the house. But the data will only show that they will only call the man of the house, the father of the house. So those are already changing, and we are not seeing it change at the top level because our program didn't speak up there yet. We are still making system change acceptance in the community from the ground up. It needs to be supported, and it needs to be accepted by the male leaders before we reach that place. We couldn't reach that place if the community doesn't agree on women leadership. But women leadership has been seen very effective in this response. And women in Eromango, they are leading the response. Women in Tana are helping the government to respond. Women in Malekula are doing response. So women in Malo are taking food down. They're doing response. So you can see leadership, but not in the political space, only in the climate change space and the humanitarian. But I think there is more collaboration for other partners to assist this work. And, it's a collective. We couldn't do it alone. So we have done some part, but it will need another part to come in if we wanted to move to the leadership space in the political area. That will need another set of person who works in these political places to link with us. But women leadership at the ground level, we are already showing, and we are breaking those barriers, and we are there. They were thinking men will come in and do the work, but it was women who at the front line, and they moved in. There's so amazing, funny stories when we got women to come in the response in one of the location, and the guy was like, I'm gonna go and talk to the driver. And he was talking to the driver, and us women, we were standing there and saying, is he okay? We are here. We just picked the driver on our way to the response. We did not, he's not our mouthpiece, but the chief sort of went to the guy and was literally talking, what is your intention? Why are you coming? And the driver just looked at him and said, I'm sorry, chief, but it's not me, it's these women there. And then he went and looked at all of us. He said, so where is your mouthpiece? I said, what mouthpiece? We are here. We are the mouthpiece. You're seeing us. So sometimes it became a shock on the culture, but the more you keep on doing it until they will accept that women can also do those roles in climate change, in the humanitarian sector, and when there's crisis. So yes, that's all I can say for now.
Thanks, Flora. That's very courageous and inspiring. I just wonder if you could briefly expand on because we know that women are diverse, if you could briefly expand on your work with women with disabilities and what the impact has been.
Thank you. So Women in Tok Together has this arm called Women in Tok Together Sunshine. And they are women that they have different impairments as disability women. This year, they have broken and said something that is, when we played back, we became very emotional to see that all this time, they have been left out in a lot of spaces. With Sunshine have developed a unique data registration on how they know their key members, what they eat, what are their sickness, what mobility device they use, what's the house like, are they sleeping with are they in a household where it's concrete, it's semi-permanent, are they with families, what are their status in how they earn a living or in how they eat. And what's the weather like? If it's too rainy, how would they feel? If it's too, so they have done a very detailed registration that they kept in peacetime. And when the disaster strike, they look at that and they already know that, okay, on a category 4, we can blow up this roof. We will need to go and assist. They just do it immediately. They have taken food dignity back and responded immediately to the communities where it has been affected. What we have seen from that is women and our families that have kept disabilities indoors for quite a number of years, 10, 15 years, they have brought those disability out because it's not a normal able woman that is responding. It's a woman who is in a wheelchair. It's a woman who is with crutches. It's a woman that is special. So they come out and they engage. And how we do our response is when they came out, they engage, we have a safe space that was created. And so they also talk about what they were facing prior disaster and during disaster and after disaster. And then the With Sunshine members are able to, share them the protection card, give to them and make sure that they have some referral that can guide them. We have seen that the food quality that we have done, it's the first respondents of women with disability, but they have hit the, I would say, the nail on the hammer. Like it really set a very strong, unique approach in the community, and it makes the community now started to think, so disability is also part of our community. They are also should be included in the data to be responded to, because that wasn't part of the data. The data is you are a disability, you are under a household, you will be looked after. But in most cases, some of them are not being given food because the priority will go to families with lots of kids. And therefore, when women leadership on disability area are moving forward, we have now bridged the gap of inclusivity. The inclusion part of the aspect on climate crisis impact have been bridged, and also on humanitarian action. They take their own lead. They were also on spaces to influence policymakers. They were part of, recently, they were part of AHP, the Australian Humanitarian Partnership. I think we have one of the workshop that we had, and we were looking on what way forward for next year. How can we work together? And our With Sunshine at that time have let the consortium know that, to be able to drive effectively in the climate crisis and humanitarian areas on the DRR, we need to be inclusive in our approach. And that means starting from the decision making, the designing of the project. You cannot do a design within not us included. And so that was very focal. And they also say, things that we thought it was okay for them, but it wasn't. For them, they need special requirements. So just With Sunshine alone, how they have framed their responses and how they have communicated to the community, being able for community to accept them.
And can I just add one thing to that, Flora, because I think having recently been in Vanuatu and met with the With Sunshine, I mean, this is as part of that bigger network. There's now 740 women with disabilities who are part of With Sunshine. What I like is the asset framing, not the deficit framing. They talk about how they are women leading disaster response with the abilities they have. And for many of them, as Flora said, they've stayed inside for 10 to 15 years. So they're sort of coming out, and the whole idea of sunshine is they're coming out into the sunshine. So it's really powerful. They've also been recognised in the standard operating procedures in emergencies as a key group for the government to consult with in times of crisis. And I think they're quite phenomenal achievements. That you should definitely be proud of, Flora.
I have one more question for you, Michelle. We know the Australian government, in addition to climate change and gender, is working on a new humanitarian strategy. Do you want to speak on some of the principles it should include and how it intersects with climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first principle I would say is that it's really important that we don't silo the humanitarian piece. I think one of the key learnings, and that we definitely have from the work in Vanuatu, is that we see too often that we see these approaches, particularly to say gender in climate change, gender in disaster risk reduction, gender in humanitarian, for the women involved. They don't silo their lives like that. So it is important that we see approaches that work across that sort of climate disaster risk reduction and humanitarian nexus, so that we're not sort of fragmenting or projectizing women's lives. I think that's important. I mean, ActionAid has a basic philosophy that if we invest in the leadership of women from affected communities before a disaster strikes, when that disaster comes, those women will not only drive more inclusive response, but the community will also see their visible leadership through the actions they take, you know, in a time of crisis, and that will start to shift the dial on gender equality. And we're seeing that in Vanuatu now. I think we're seeing it at such a rapid pace where, you know, as Flora mentioned, women have been invited into the Council of Chiefs in Erromango. Women have been invited into the National Emergency Operations Centre previously when they were excluded. So, what I would say is it needs to include a focus on women's leadership and a focus on that disaster preparedness, because, you know, for communities on the front lines, what's critical is that they are prepared when disaster strikes. I think the other thing I want to highlight, and that's been a persistent challenge with humanitarian, is that, you know, despite the knowledge that violence against women and girls increases in absolutely every single crisis, we still see protection as the least funded area of all humanitarian response. And the majority of that funding actually goes to child protection. It doesn't go to protecting women from violence against women. So we need to see a boosted focus on that, matched by resources. And you know, and when we think about protection, what we also know is that the best approaches are those that are locally led. They're not from protection experts who come in from outside, analyse the problems, talk to women, decide for them. The work that, you know, that's going on in Vanuatu and other Pacific countries has really been an approach that supports local women to identify and drive their own protection agenda, which is particularly important in a context where in some of the islands where ActionAid's working, there are no police posts. So there's no one there who's going to come and save the women when you know, they face increased violence. So it is really about how do we tap into the existing capability, the networks, the knowledge that women have to be able to respond to those threats as they arise. So, I mean, I think there are some things that are really important to be thinking about from that gender lens. Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle. So I hope today we've just demonstrated the double dividend of working on climate equality and climate justice, gender equality and climate justice, the importance of recognising and celebrating the deep knowledge that women hold and combining this with scientific knowledge in a two-way feedback mechanism, that we're ensuring women have strong collectives where they can safely speak and organise around their issues and formulate their agendas. And these collectives are recognised by governments and institutions transformed to include them regularly in planning and budgeting. And ensuring women are in policy and decision-making spaces like Flora in COP at the moment. And speaking strongly to their agendas. And this is at local, regional, national and global levels. But I want to put our hands together for the panel, Flora. And a special thanks to Flora for getting up so early.
Thank you, Flora.
Thank you for having me.
You can go back to bed now.
Thank you.